Good morning or afternoon, wherever you're calling in from today. We're going to get going in just a few minutes. While we wait, we're just going to ask you to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from today, what organization you work with, and if you like s'mores or not. Love s'mores. We got one. Thanks, Corey. All right. I think we're going to get going. As people are coming in, please just feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear where you're calling from today, what organization you work with, and whether or not you like s'mores. Who doesn't love a good s'more? Today's meeting is a little different than our general webinar spaces. This is a meeting space. So we wanted to really be able to open up the floor and let people communicate with us. So it's going to be really easy to come off mute and share your thoughts or ask questions. Feel free to stay with your camera off or put your camera on, however you're comfortable today. We just really wanted this to be more of a conversation than a traditional webinar. So that's why we're in this space today. We are having everyone come in muted just to keep the airway a little cleaner. If you have a comment, feel free to come off mute, say your comment, ask your question, and then just mute yourself again so that we can make sure the lines stay clear. We encourage you to ask questions throughout, but there will be dedicated time at the end for more of an open conversation. So feel free to hold on to those questions until the end or ask while you're getting the information from Jen and Nate. This will be recorded and will be sent out in the next few days. So you will not miss anything if you have to hop at any given time. We will send all of the information out to you by the end of the week. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our hosts today. We have Jennifer Svensson, partner here at Agility Talent Partners, and Nate Browning, a senior consultant. So Jen, you want to take it away?
Hey everyone. My name is Jen, as Joanna mentioned, and I'm a partner at Agility Consulting. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm located up in central New Hampshire. And I started my career as a scientist and have my PhD in cell biology. And I was a cancer researcher for 15 years before I became a mom and didn't see a space for myself in the sciences anymore. I knew I wanted to be home when my littles were little, and I couldn't do experiments from my living room. And so I pivoted all of those data research and analysis skills into compensation and switched careers 9 years ago when I joined Agility as a founding member of their compensation team, and have worked over the last 9 years now to build that compensation practice. And in that time have worked with hundreds of nonprofits and charter schools across the U.S. around the design of their compensation programs, and so bring sector-wide knowledge to all of the work that I do with clients at Agility. And just generally excited to be here with you all to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, which is compensation. And so I'll hand it to Nate and let him tell you a little bit about himself.
I appreciate it, Jen. Awesome. Hey, everybody. Nice to see everybody. Nice to meet everybody. My name is Nate. I'm a senior consultant here at Agility Talent Partners. I've been with the firm for about 4 years now. My anniversary was actually yesterday, so that was really cool to meet that milestone. I originally started out studying aerospace engineering in college. I had a dream of being an astronaut. Ended up not being the route that I wanted to go. I wanted to be more involved in helping people out, working with people, and kind of using some of the technical skills I learned from that. But also kind of having more of an interface to talk with people and help them and where they're at. So I ended up studying data science recently, actually just graduated in May. I got my master's. And for the past 4 years, I've been helping design structures and running comp analysis to help people out. So it's been a fun ride. Yeah. Awesome. To kind of kick us off here, just to tell you all a little bit more about who we are at Agility Talent Partners, the work that we do is really centered around building values-driven talent systems. And we do that through the three kind of major lines you see listed up here. We want to empower people, we want to strengthen systems, and we want to advance missions. We work a lot in each of these different categories. We talk to people all throughout, different levels of organizations, and we would work with systems all throughout different levels of organizations, all with the goal of getting organizations closer to the mission that they want to achieve at their org. So that kind of gives you a high level understanding of the work we do and some of our mission. But in the next slide, you're going to talk about another important piece of the work that is very important to us, and that's equity. And so in the work that we do, we're not only trying to get you closer to your mission, but we're also trying to instill equity in the systems that we build for folks. And what that looks like for us is removing some of those systemic barriers that have historically left people in certain categories outside of the conversation. We want to dismantle those systems of oppression and make it so that tomorrow can be a better tomorrow for everybody involved, no matter where you're at, no matter where you come from, and no matter what your past is. So we practice that through a lot of our values. Really, the goal here is we want to be authentic. We want to be curious. We want to be very thoughtful in how we approach our work. We want to bring some warmth and joy to this. It can be kind of very laborious, and so we want to really, bring a smile to the conversation. And to kind of tie that all together, we want to make sure that we provide a tangible impact. Impact can look different, and what path you choose might look different per person, per org. So we're looking to get you something that's going to work the best for you, and that's really at the center of what we do. So just to kind of give you all an idea of some of the sectors and organizations we've worked with, you'll see a couple listed here in this picture. I've had the pleasure of getting to work with about 4 of those listed on here. All great times. But we primarily work with organizations that are in the nonprofit and the educational sector. We deal with organizations that are in healthcare nonprofits, life sciences. I mean, all philanthropic services, you name it. We've worked with organizations all across the board. So a pleasure to continue to do that to this day. And with that being said, we're going to kick off into some of the analytics pieces of what we're talking about today. And so one of the first pieces that we're going to cover is this wonderful thing called inflation. You all know it. We all kind of keep an eye on it as time goes by. But just to kind of kick us off and look at what does this look like in practice and what we're seeing as of current today, we kind of have this historical path we can follow here from the left to the right. So there is the average national inflation that you kind of see over here on the left that we pulled from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this is kind of the big figure that we hear a lot. What does it look like average across the nation? In terms of 2024 to 2025, it's about 2.7%, which is a decline from what we've seen over the past 5 years in general. But as we all know, when you take an average across the nation, it's not necessarily indicative of it being the same in all areas. And so we kind of have to zoom in a little bit into different regions across the United States and look that it's not going to be different, depending on where you're at. What we've seen over here from our source is that we've had inflation in different regions anywhere from 1% to up to 4.3%. So on some of the lower end, you're going to see like areas around the South, maybe some places in the Midwest or, in the western part of the country. It's going to be closer to that 1% where there's not that drastic of an increase, but in some of areas like Los Angeles, New England, Chicago, we saw numbers that were closer to that 4% mark. And so there can be a vast difference depending on where you're at and depending on the time in the year that this occurs. And so that's another way to look at it. But to kind of humanize this and put it in a way, we see inflation as this number, this percentage that kind of comes in every year. But there's kind of a way that you can kind of think of it that people feel inflation. And so to kind of humanize it, what does this look like in terms of the average household cost since 2021? And that can range anywhere from $25,000 to $44,000 for a household, which is a pretty big jump. So while it can vary depending on, your lifestyle, different regions, et cetera, there's a number of different factors that can kind of be considered in this. One of the things that always kind of reigns true is that it's always going to disproportionately impact those who are lower income workers. And so those are, a group that we want to make sure that we keep an eye on. But to kind of continue this conversation, I'm actually going to pass it over to Jen, and she's going to talk about the difference in cost of labor and cost of living, how we view those.
Yep. So Nate just shared a little bit of information around inflation, which is typically what we think about in terms of cost of living. There's also another market index that we look at when we're thinking about compensation, and that's the cost of labor. The cost of labor is the cost to hire talent in a specific location, and it reflects the difference in pay for the same job in different locations. So a teacher I'm in New Hampshire is going to be paid something different than a teacher in New York City. And that has to do with the geographical influence on salaries in both of those different regions. So that cost, again, to hire talent in each of those two locations. It's typically more reliable and less volatile than inflation. And it generally is what compensation experts are looking at when they're determining salary midpoints, thinking about salary increases, as well as thinking about geographic differentials and how folks may be paid differently depending on the different geographies that they live in. It's really your best way of staying competitive with your peers when it comes to hiring and keeping talent. The other piece, that inflation piece that Nate mentioned, we oftentimes think of that as cost of labor, which is the cost of consumer goods, or inflation affects the cost of living, I guess, which is the cost of consumer goods in a specific location. So things like food, housing, transportation, taxes is our cost of living. We think about cost of living from a compensation expert or compensation perspective when we're thinking about living wages and setting wage floors. Occasionally, we also think about cost of living in terms of salary increases. That most commonly happens when cost of living outpaces cost of labor. So when cost of living becomes higher, or inflation becomes higher than cost of labor, we start to think about how we're going to consider cost of living and cost of labor together when we determine increases for that year. That doesn't happen all that often. Typically, cost of labor outpaces cost of living, and I'll show you some data around that in the next few slides. Cost of living is more volatile and less reliable. So before we get into the next few slides, just quickly want to talk about what market metrics should I use to inform my yearly base pay increases, or kind of where can I find this information? Certainly you can find it through benchmarking, and if you either use a software that allows you to benchmark, or if you come to Agility and work with us to do that benchmarking, you'll have that data. However, a lot of the organizations we're working with only benchmark every 2 to 3 years. And so in those years when they're not benchmarking, they need to know, where can we find this information, right? So the best place to find this information is really in multiple places, and to think about it all together rather than picking any one source. So you want to look at inflation and cost of living. That's free through the U.S. government's Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's reported as your CPI, or your Consumer Price Index. You want to look at cost of labor. That's also free through the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's reported as your ECI, which is in the Employment Cost Index. And then you can look at budget surveys. So there's a number of different compensation or companies across the U.S. that put out yearly budget surveys. PayScale is typically what we use. It's a free resource. All you have to do is go on PayScale's website, put in your email address, and they'll send you the survey for free. So that's probably, and as well as it's an incredibly reliable survey as well. PayScale is one of the top 3 compensation databases in the U.S. And so they put out really strong data. There's also ones through Mercer and World at Work, but those may be ones you have to pay for. Kind of moving forward to what can we learn from these different data sources. First, we see that higher inflation rates have led to historic increases in the cost of living over the past 4 years. So what we see is that historically cost of living is generally pretty stable, and it stays between about 1% and 2% or 1% and 2.5%. However, what happened during the pandemic was we saw a large spike in inflation that led to higher cost of living. And what we're seeing since then is that over the last 3 to 4 years that has started to cool. So we're down to 2.7%. We're kind of almost back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of where inflation is. Next, we see that higher inflation rates have led to increases in the cost of labor as well. So that's not unusual. Typically, when goods become more expensive in our households, employees look to their employers to pay them more to cover that extra cost of goods. When employers pay them more, that drives up cost of labor. So you oftentimes will see cost of labor and cost of living in a positive feedback cycle where they influence each other. What you see for cost of labor is that it's not as volatile, right? So that jump isn't as big during the pandemic. We see that it tends to be higher than cost of living. So even if we look back to 2015, 2016, 2017, we see it's closer to between 2% and 3%. That's where it generally sits, outside of kind of years where we have big spikes in the market. And the last thing we see is that it hasn't really cooled yet, right? We haven't seen huge decreases in cost of labor similar to what we've seen in inflation. It's still running about 4%. Even into 2025, as we look at the statistics from Q1 and Q2, we can see we're still at about 3.8% in 2025 as well. We're tracking at about 3.8% in 2025. And then the last place we can look for information is from pay scale or from salary budget surveys. There's a number of them out there. The pay scale survey allows you to look at what organizations are budgeting for salary increases that year. It also looks at promotional increases and gives some statistics around what a typical promotional increase looks like, as well as looks at salary structure increases. So it kind of gives you, and it breaks out base pay increases as well into COLA and merit and other types of increases. So you can get a wealth of data in there across a lot of different industries. I focused on nonprofits, but they have data in there for education as well. And essentially what we're seeing is that in terms of what organizations or employers are budgeting for base pay increases going into the end of this year, so kind of thinking about what they budgeted either in 2025 or what they're budgeting for increases for 2026, they're running at about 3.5% for 2025 in the nonprofit sector, and then expected to be about 3.7% for 2026. So in 2026, they're expecting increases to go up slightly. Based on that data I just showed you, where it said cost of labor is closer to 3.8%, we can see that what companies are budgeting is not quite matching how the labor market is shifting. So they're budgeting less than kind of the overall shifts we're seeing in the labor market, which is important to be aware of, although they are quite close. In terms of looking at salary structure increases, those are closer to about 2%. So organizations are shifting the midpoints of their salary structures in the range around them by about 2% per year, roughly. So taking all of this together, we want to think of it holistically. So we see cost of living is lower than cost of labor. We see peers are budgeting about 3.5%. So thinking about that again holistically, would recommend that organizations or would expect that organizations are budgeting anywhere between 3% and 4%. Getting as close to that 4% as you can, kind of depending on what you have available in your budget for the year. But really, I would, even if I was very tight, say you want to be somewhere between 3.5% and 3.8% if you can. But I've broadened that a little bit more to account for folks that might have a little bit less or a little bit more budget. That will keep you ahead of the cost of living. It'll keep you kind of close the cost of labor and keep you right in line with what your peers are budgeting. So I'm going to hand it back to Nate and let him kind of finish us off before we open it up for questions.
I appreciate you, Jen. All righty, so we kind of have some information here about, data looking at how cost of living and labor has rose over time or maybe shifted over time. And so maybe, annual salary planning might be coming up. Maybe it's recently passed and you're thinking about next year. What are some of the essential ingredients that make a successful annual salary planning? Over here on the right, you can kind of break this up into three categories in a way, or three big major categories. We have philosophy, we have data, and we have analysis. Over here at the top, you have compensation philosophy first. And I'll name throughout this list, some organizations might have all of this, some organizations might have a mix of some of this, but that's okay. The goal is eventually to reach a point where you have all of the things listed, but we also know that this is a journey. So a compensation philosophy is kind of one of the first pieces that we name. This is essentially a living document that you all design within your organization that says on the left, these are the things that we believe to be true about compensation at our organization and that we believe in. And so based on that, to the right of it, these are the policies that will then fall into place in our organization based on what we believe here at our organization. This kind of serves as like a North Star anytime that you make major decisions around compensation to say, okay, we have this tough, decision we need to make. Let's refer back to our compensation philosophy as to what we stand on around how we pay people and our pay practices within our organization. So some organizations have this built in. Some might, be in the process of designing it, or maybe this is something that you all haven't had a chance to design yet. But it is a good practice just to kind of go through and build out so that it can inform your decisions. We move down from the kind of philosophy piece into some data. We have market compensation data. This is going to be more relative to that cost of labor numbers that we talked about that Jen mentioned earlier. And so this helps to kind of build your structure, show how much your structure should shift over time. But we don't want to necessarily just leave out cost of living data. It's going to supplement our structure after the fact. After we've kind of looked at cost of labor, we then want to look at cost of living and see where is our structure falling short? Where are there any areas in which a person is falling below this, and how can we adjust for that? We finally have performance data. If you use any merit-based increases or any merit-based systems within your pay, you'll definitely want to have good performance data to kind of hold up on that end of any increases that are coming up for the next year. And there's finally this last two bullets down here that are more catered towards the analysis piece, in my opinion. And we're looking at local cost of labor trends. So you've kind of had a picture or a snapshot in time of what the data looks like right now. Can you look at over the next, the past few years and see how that cost of labor has been shifting in your primary area? It may look different. For example, I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. My shifts in cost of labor are going to look a lot different than those in San Francisco, for example. And so kind of keeping that in mind for where you're at and what you can expect moving forward. And then the last piece here on the list is a regression or an observational wage gap analysis. This is a good way to test your structures and ensure that there's no systematic kind of decisions that are baked in that are potentially causing wage gaps by any identifiable characteristics like race, gender, or age. Those are the big three that we usually test for. Typically, organizations that are 50 staff members or lower, we typically stick to an observational wage gap analysis, which is more of looking like median salary by race, gender, age, et cetera, because it doesn't have as much statistical power as an organization that might have 50 or more staff members where you can run a regression and really get a controlled analysis where you can get some statistical significance. So we always recommend just kind of doing those as you make updates to your structure to make sure that there's no systemic issues kind of going forward. What I want to jump back to is this data piece. We talked a lot about data over, the course of all of our slides that we talked through today. But one of the things that is good to keep in mind is that bad data will lead to bad decisions. And so what are some of the ways that you can avoid bad data? Using at least three sources. This goes for both cost of labor and cost of living. I like to incorporate it in both. For cost of labor, you can use things such as salary surveys around your peers in the area. You can use data sources that I like to rely on, such as industry-based data sources. This can look like salary.com's comp analyst. This can look like pay scale, the Economic Research Institute. And one of the advantages that these databases actually have over other surveys is that not only does it allow you to filter by your geographic location, your size, the number of staff you have, but it also allows you to benchmark not only based on title, but by the description and job duties that are listed. So rather than just going, director of operations at my organization to director of operations at another organization, where it may not be an exact match, you can actually read through some of the descriptions and what that person is responsible for and make sure that it matches completely because one role at one organization may not be the same at another. And so that's another way you can kind of strengthen your analysis. And so those are going to be the two most popular for cost of labor data or kind of your market competitiveness data. When you look at cost of living data, that's going to be more around tools like the MIT Living Wage Calculator. This is one of the ones that I heavily rely on. It also gives you a breakdown by family structure and by the different expenses. So it'll show you rent, taxes, healthcare, transportation, all that is broken down on it by the different city or county. I will often supplement that with the Economic Policy Institute. They have a similar calculator that you can use. Both of those resources break down their methodology on their website. So you can actually see how they're using these different figures to calculate the number that you're looking at for cost of living. And then the last thing that we like to mention is try to look for recent data. Ideally, try to get something that's at least less than a year old. Understandably, you can't always get that, but that's what we try to shoot for to make sure that we're as up to date as possible. You may have to do a little bit of aging here or there for some data sources, but the more recent we can get, the better. So awesome.
To saying thank you for joining us today from both Nate and I. Is there a survey, Joanna? Or no? Okay, so we're not running a survey today, so that's not coming out. But just thank you for joining us today. Joanna will be following up with an email. Joanna, can you tell them what's going to be in the email?
Yes, we had a lot of resources brought up today. I will link all of those to the email. You'll have the deck and the recording. So if you have any questions, I'll also include our wonderful hosts' contact information. So if you have any other follow-up questions, you can reach out to them directly. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Agility Talent Partners. We're also on Facebook, Blue Sky, and Instagram if you're on any of those platforms and would like to follow us there for more timely, up-to-date blog posts and releases.
And I would say if anyone wants time with me, we'll include my link in the email as well, my Zoom link, or Calendly link, just so you can book in. Feel free to find it. I'm more than happy to jump on a 30-minute call and talk through questions one-on-one. Thank you, folks.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you all.